In this world, is the destiny of mankind controlled by a bunch of malevolent Jews and boomer Anglos? Are they like the hands of Satan hovering above? At least it is true that the average man has no control, even over his own will.
All right, what the hell? Address the Jewish question. That's a hell of a thing to ask.
Okay, surface level, above ground. Cutting off the top of a baby's penis and sucking the blood out of it.
Yes, we do know this. This is in the dossier.
Yeah,
correct.
right. That's above ground.
That's above ground.
What could possibly be happening in the tunnel? What could possibly be happening in the tunnel?
From an outward perception, like outwardly, it really kind of seems like the USA is completely cucked by Israel. It does.
You love the Jews?
I do.
You love white people?
I don't understand the meaning of that question.
Bon, qui? Vous qui parlez de Dreyfus, monsieur. Qui?
AIPAC is evil. Evil.
Candace, I cry every day. And it's not just for Israel.
But I don't think of, and I have white privilege, but I don't think of myself as a white person. I think of myself as a Jew, first and foremost. So it's a complicated identity. But I think that it's sort of, it's whitewashed by these people. And I think that anti-Semitism just isn't taken seriously and doesn't rate because people perceive Jews as having privilege and power in this country, which largely they do.
It's a huge transformation for Europe to make. They are now going into a multicultural mode, and Jews will be resented because of our leading role. But without that leading role and without that transformation, Europe will not survive.
And I'm sick of worshiping Israel. Did you know back in the 1960s they bombed the USS Liberty knowing it was one of our ships because it caught the radio chatter of them killing thousands of Palestinian children during that invasion, and they torpedoed it as they begged for hours on the radio, and LBJ sat there in 63 and let them do it?
We are a people that has been kicked out of every place we've ever lived for 2,000 years.
Jews, one word, one syllable, one people. They are, as a group, an enigma, dipped in humus and wrapped in layer upon layer of mystery matzah bread. As one scholar put it, they are just like us, only more so. The word Jew carries its profound meaning in three fundamental ways. A noun representing a people, chosen by God to lead the way for all mankind. A nation, made up of said people, both in the now, the real, the unappreciated, and as a culture, ancient and mysterious, linked to a bloodline through which one can denote, from mother to child, who has and who has not been touched by God's grace. Go beyond this mere word, however, and it becomes clear very quickly that they, as a people, as a culture, as an idea itself, are so unique, so multi-layered and multifaceted that perhaps, and I presume, outside of Hebrew, we lack the words in English that would be needed to ever describe them properly. They are somehow both orthodox and revolutionary simultaneously, both necessarily progressive and yet fundamentally conservative. You could even say, in a manner of speaking, that they are the craftsmen of the cornerstone of Judeo-Christian values itself, which, if we were to be left bereft of, would surely all suffer and languish. Nevertheless, going back to the word itself, Jew, in other unenlightened contexts, and unfortunately, in many languages, cultures, and across the centuries, over and over again, one is forced to face the fact that the simple word Jew, when it's not screamed out as a warning like wolf or enemy, is often used as a multifunctional pejorative by non-Jews in the form of a verb, i.e., to Jew one over, as an adjective, i.e., to describe one's behavior as quintessentially Jewish with negative connotations, or as a noun and in its original form, often used like the previous examples, as an accusation of sorts when leveled at anyone who is, to read between the lines, not behaving like one of us, or in the way that you should be. Now you may be asking, why does any of this matter? Well, it matters because it represents, albeit in a microcosm, the greater problem I want to tackle today, and indeed every day going forward, the problem of problems that faces us all. I have spent the better part of my mainstream relevance searching for, well, what would you call it? Perhaps, if you will, a rhetorical final solution to the scourge of intersectional anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, and the ever-looming specter of non-Jewish white nationalism. But like many problems, one of the hardest parts about dealing with it is defining the problem correctly. The problem with that, however, is that the difficulty in knowing where to start sometimes leaves us paralyzed. Vulnerable in our hesitation, we, the kind and pro-social guardians of Logos, end up paying the heaviest of prices, killing that which we love and need the most by leaving it in our uncertainty and our lack of faith to the wolves of predatory pattern recognition and the dark, tetratic tendencies of malignant malcontents, who would dare, as but one example, launder their cruelty and resentment towards the most innocent and successful of us all through false compassion and concern for Palestine and its people. So, I've chosen to start here, because it's better to start somewhere than not at all. We need to face this yellow-bellied dragon head-on if we want to save and preserve our Judeo-American Christian heritage. And that's what this project is all about. My name is Jordan Peterson. I'm a world-renowned author, teacher, and an internet father figure to millions of circumcised men all around the globe. On behalf of myself, the Daily Wire, and indeed in defense of the very soul of Judeo-Western civilization, and after more than 2,000 long and painful years together, this is What is a Jew? An antidote to anti-Semitism. We all know the controversy around the documentary What is a Woman, also made by the Daily Wire. But what is a Jew? I'm serious. Think about it. It is not as cut and dry as you might think, pardon the pun. The history of these great folks stretches back to times long since forgotten, and the forms and shapes that Jews can and do take, even in the modern era, are as dynamic and ever-changing as the world writ large. And so, yet again, we could go back to the previous issue of simply not having the right words and enough time to describe them as philosemitically as they deserve, using that as an excuse perhaps to not even attempt to do so. But we are not going to do that. Instead, we're going to do what we can with what we have, and that's okay. That's better than not at all. So let's make a distinction up front between the profound ethnocentric religion of Judaism and the people of whom it speaks. Judaism, or the Jewish faith, is a pro-monotheistic ethno-religion, which, the longest story of all made short, promotes the idea that this people, the Jewish people, through the blood of their ancestors, through the sacrifices they've made and the sufferances they've endured, have been selected by God Himself, entrusted with a holy and noble purpose. Judaism itself, a riposte and rejection of Christian beliefs, is centered around the idea that Jews, the best and brightest examples of God's creation, were chosen to light and lead the way, for themselves and each other. And then, after their needs are met and in their graciousness, the unchosen flock as well, granted by grace they seldom deserve, the boon of greener pastures for fairly reasonable prices. This idea of ethnic or racial distinction above others is not, as some buffoons have asserted, an idea that runs parallel to the concept of, say, an Aryanic master race. Instead, it's closer in spirit to a friendly and helpful shepherding race, sacred guardians and custodians of us, their most vulnerable of flocks, on the way to a brighter and more wonderful future. Shrouded in mystery to this very day, the secrets of the Jewish faith embedded within the Holy Torah, guarded fiercely throughout history by its rabbinical protectors, are, much to their disgust, available online for free for all of us to read. In spite of this, while still being a thing of profound depth, beauty, and complexity to outsiders, the scope and scale of these pillars of Western thought, the bedrock of our own notions of benevolence, are simply too far beyond the comprehension of the non-Jewish mind to process. If we instead focus upon the people, as in what makes someone biologically or ethnically Jewish, well, that's a good question. and it's one that has been debated for millennia, back and forward, both in rabbinical discussions and non-Jewish discourse. The latter, sadly, often while holding pitchforks, flaming torches, or oven doors ajar. We'll get to that in a moment. This form of racial or ethnic Jew, while bound to the group narrative that Judaism preaches, is of course able to exist outside of it. Sometimes this is by choice. Other times this is without even realizing it. You yourself might be Jewish, and you may not even know it. The most common idea of what makes one Jewish by blood is the idea of matrilineal descent, Jewish down the female line. If your mother was Jewish, then you are Jewish. If your father was Jewish and your mother not, you are either not or you are half Jewish. Sometimes. This, of course, depends on how Orthodox, Reform, and all the different types of Judaism or Jewish thought are willing to define Jewishness. The de facto or most common form of Jewish descent is matrilineal descent. This on its own is very interesting when compared against other ideas that exist around what defines a people, a culture, or whether or not, for example, someone can truly be considered transracial or Cherokee when it suits them if they are perhaps, let's say, 15/16 Anglo-European oppressor, or something like that. Long ago, in times more toxically masculine, the ethnic Jew, or blood Jew as a concept, was actually meant to be passed down through patrilineal descent, father to child. The reasons for this change are itself a topic worthy of another book alone. Suffice it to say that some Jews feared in this definitional transformation, made after much thought and discussion, that which previously made one fundamentally Jewish was essentially doomed by this notion of matrilineal descent to be watered down and diluted. The blood of this most chosen of peoples forever tainted and diversified, casting them as a people adrift into the hell of ethnically mongrelized oblivion. Thankfully, those fears and doubts were clearly wrong. Jews are more than just a people, a bloodline, or a people with a religion and culture. They are a people with a history, a dark, tragic, and awe-inspiring history that tells not just their story, but all of our stories. Beset upon from all sides and at all times by those hatched from the bedeviled and spiritually scrambled rotten eggs of hate and contempt, Jews as a people have suffered extensively, perhaps more so and more often so than any other group that exists now or has ever existed, and whose suffering in their extinction has, unlike that of Jews today, come to an end. Nevertheless, in their industriousness and tenacity as a people, Jews have managed against all odds to survive the rise and precede the fall of countless non-Philisemitic and correspondingly despotic empires across the ages. From under the heels of the pharaohs of ancient Egypt, or the tyranny of the ancient Romans, to the death camps of the Nazis of the Third Reich, and now in our time to the terror of Hamas and their Palestinian supporters, it has been through the eternal hope and strength contained within the Jewish spirit, and their grit and will as a people, that they have managed to endure the abject evils that the world set against them. Jews have endured this for all of our sakes, reduced as they often are to mere fellow white people by some, or ultra-white people to others even less rational, their true identity as hyphenated intergenerational Holocaust survivors, protectors of the memories of those 6 million preordained lost souls, lest they be forgotten, often goes overlooked. Contemplate the miracle of these people. Jews even having the collective strength and bravery left over, after all they have been through, to reaffirm their sacred duty time and time again to defend the entire Western world against the ever-present threat of anti-Semitism, the dam which, upon bursting, consumes all and sundry without pity, is, while predictable, given their nature as a people, is still, at least to me, both astounding and incomparably noble. And so, like Jesus himself upon the cross, they have chosen and have been chosen to suffer in our stead, all with the hope in their minds and hearts that they should not leave humanity undefended, and that even the unchosen, unwashed, and oft ungrateful people of the world still deserve the chance to benefit from their influence, insight, and counsel. They are, in a sense, the spiritual soap by which we cleanse our own bodies and lives with, the lampshades over our inner destructive fire. It is clear that without them, without their guiding light as a check against our own darkness, and without Israel herself, greatest and most noble of allies in all endeavors, all is lost for all of us, and nothing worthwhile is gained. Despite this, Jews have been bullied and beaten relentlessly by God's unchosen masses, seemingly without respite. It takes but a cursory glance at our collective history, gazing through even the most opaque and self-servingly dysfunctional of lenses to see that lesser folk by comparison, who've had lesser burdens to bear than Jews, would wilt in the face of but an iota of what the Jewish people as a whole have faced in their shared, and according to some Jewish research, even uniquely genetically inheritable trauma. With this in mind, how could so many people from so many cultures across time wind up becoming almost synchronistically anti-Semitic? What on earth could cause them, or indeed anyone, to make any negative associations or cast any venomous accusations against these people who, historically speaking, are, seemingly without fault, aggression or transgression upon anyone? Well, the simplest answer, often the best one, is that in most cases, it's little more than sheer jealousy and awe. The reputation of Jewish people precedes them as they proceed to outdo almost all others in all things great and small, where the Gentile, the non-Jew, and most especially the white Gentile, is more often than not predestined by his own inadequacies and lack of insight to always follow along in the Jew's wake. In this, Jews are cursed with the plight of being the envy of all others. Scapegoated like their own Kaparat sin chickens in a sense, Jews are used as piñatas and punching bags for the weak, the vile, and the jealous to cathartically work out their inadequacies upon. The sins and failings of the Gentile, once again pinned on the Jew, and all for the crime of being chosen by grace to be the best of us all, and rise to the top of any hierarchy of merit or competence in the most unsuspicious of ways. Going beyond the interventions of grace, we can see, both at home and abroad, that Jews, as a specifically unique group of people, tend to flourish and thrive in societies where others, especially white people, or people of any European ethnonym, are themselves rendered formless, unspecific, and ununique. This benefits everyone. Those of resentful stock, however, such as the white, incelious metaphorical lobster low on serotonin, prone as they are to bouts of ultraviolence, extreme nepotism, and predatory forms of anti-Semitic pattern establishment, may falsely assert an equivalent comparison to the point I made above to that of a thief who benefits when placed within a society where one is expected to leave their doors unlocked. Or as of a virus, perhaps, that benefits when the immune system of the host is compromised. This accusation, petty and banal, even when humored in good faith, reveals itself to be as scientifically and rhetorically baseless as those of good sense would expect. We see that when the white Gentile no longer focuses on his own naive and illusionary ideas of hypothetical specifics that could benefit himself, or his self-serving idea of what his people even are, Jewish people as a specific group of people tend to outperform him specifically in everything good. The studies on this are crystal clear. This is thanks in large part to the energies of Jewish activism and academia, who have across the years done everything they can to disarm the very idea of whiteness and white people as concepts. Historical murderer of Jews and enslavers and conquerors of Jews and non-white people alike, these efforts to undermine such toxically nepotistic ideals has essentially thwarted Jewish people's would-be usurpers in their cradles, all done slowly and gently in the background of our minds, without notice. The angry white Gentile, now ethno-ideologically declawed, spiritually circumcised. We can also use differences in IQ between groups as an explanation, though I admit it's not one without controversy. It's important to highlight before we do that when or if the white Gentile does better than those we tend to group together as non-white, we simply cannot, or perhaps dare not, risk treating them the same way as we do Jewish people. The reason for this is the white Gentile is undoubtedly responsible via his ancestors' crimes for many or most of the failings and grievances of others. More importantly, and as a precaution, we must avoid allowing the white Gentile to establish some sense of ethnic clarity or unity, lest we dare reopen the violent white supremacist doors of 20th century thoughts on ethnic Darwinism and racial determinism, to which the white Gentile seems, much like the Nazi of his day, inherently predisposed and inclined towards. For this reason, we also do not compare the intelligence of Jewish people to those of the Gentile, who is non-white or non-white adjacent. The white and non-white Gentile is not the same in terms of moral accountability. And so, in the spirit of shared victimhood as a result of white transgressions and hypocrisies, the Jew and the non-white Gentile must stand together and not be compared with or turned against each other for their own sakes. Now, to tackle the so-called Jewish question on IQ, which is to say, this differential between Ashkenazi Jewish people and the white non-Jewish population of the West, well, it seems to be, being mindful as we have to be of the racist, white supremacist origins of racial determinism, because the IQs of the Jews are simply higher than white people's IQs, on a provable, specific, genetic, racial level. It's just that simple. It's unknown whether the disparity in intelligence that marks the Jew from the white Gentile is the result of a bottleneck, where perhaps smarter Jews were more likely to escape or avoid the ovens, gas chambers, and death camps of the Nazis, and were therefore more likely to survive and have children, or if it's perhaps instead just another mysterious thread in the tapestry of God's grand design. Further complicating things, more research needs to be done to see if this boon of higher intelligence is also transferred down the female line, as is Jewishness itself. Suffice it to say that the success of Jewish people both now and across time, no matter what way you slice it, is a major factor at play when it comes to the hatred and hardship that they face, each and every day. Another factor to Jewish excellence that gets overlooked far too often is the drive and determination promoted within Jewish culture to achieve success, which is promoted at every level. The Jewish tiger parent, fundamentally dissimilar to the lackadaisical boomer parent, strategically positions their child for success through a rigorous educational regimen, the inculcation of a steadfast work ethic, and the nurturing of a profoundly motivational cultural and historical identity. This ethos transcends religious devotion, benefiting both the devout and those who, even on a purely cultural level, internalize the timeless wisdom imparted by the Torah. Remarkably, this pursuit of Jewish excellence is not confined to Jewish families alone. We can see as an example how many individuals of Chinese heritage, renowned for their own rigorous educational standards and commitment to success and ethical meticulousness in the business world, have begun studying the Torah in the hope that they too can harness its teachings, seeking to integrate its profound insights and practices into their own lives. Naturally, the Jewish community takes great pride in this achievement, as well they should. This reverence among the more enlightened Gentiles towards Jewish people is a rightful source of pride and joy. In an effort to protect themselves and their community from the ever-looming threat of blood libels and prejudice, they strive to uphold their dignity and ensure that their contributions and values are recognized and respected, while not being sullied by assertions about overrepresentation or nepotistic monopolies. This protective stance, while perhaps misunderstood by some, is a necessary measure to guard against the persistent threat of being unfairly maligned or punished for the offense of being pushed to put in more effort than his non-Jewish peers. Before I proceed any further, and going back to the bit about pitchforks and flaming torches, you might have observed that I have deliberately made a concerted effort to distinguish between the Gentile, the non-Jew, and the non-white non-Jew, setting them apart from the white Gentile. Why have I done this? It's not to complicate matters unnecessarily, I assure you. This differentiation, while it may initially appear confusing, is crucial for a comprehensive understanding of the broader context and the intricate dynamics at play. Jews as a people have consistently been at the vanguard of nearly every progressive movement in the West, diligently working to keep their non-Jewish white counterparts' tyrannical and racist tendencies in check. Driven by their historical appreciation for the threat of ethnic prejudice and the horrors of the early 20th century, their leadership has guided Gentiles dutifully along the straight and narrow path toward the progress and equality they promised, but failed as a whole to deliver. However, it is essential to recognize that this guidance and promotion of true and real equality can and should only continue up to the point where it ceases to benefit the Jewish community as a distinct group who, threatened across time constantly, need to remain cautious. There exists a pernicious canard, a sort of blood libel in the minds of the non-white non-Jew, that propagates the notion that Jewish people, particularly those of Ashkenazi descent, are also just white people. This dangerous idea overlooks the complex reality that white people, written as always with a lowercase w, are not a coherent group, except when they need to be criticized and put in their place for their past and present transgressions, or, reminded as they often need to be, to not take pride in unearned glories of the past, when there are still countless intergenerational victims who have been left unheard and without restitution. Due to the unfortunate coincidence of many Jewish individuals having white skin, white privilege, being mostly European, and being overrepresented in various metrics of success, the white Gentile often attempts to trick the low-information non-white Gentile by projecting his own guilt and culpability onto unaware Jewish patsies. Both Jews and non-white Gentiles, though seemingly opposite in some respects, share a profound similarity in that they are both the foremost victims and, in an intergenerational sense, are brothers and sisters in anguish due to the excesses and shortcomings of those we call white. While the non-white Gentile may occasionally subscribe to anti-Semitic tropes and beliefs, they are generally not regarded as the primary source of those beliefs or as a true existential threat to Jewish people, unless they are Iranian or Palestinian. These distinctions are critical in understanding the complex interplay between historical victimization and the nuanced subtleties of anti-Semitism and its discontents. The way that I had it explained to me by my Jewish peers is this. While Jewish people may be physically white, they cannot and should not be seen as morally white. The non-Jew or Gentile, while a specific designation in one sense, fails on its own to capture the fine distinction necessary for understanding the ideas at play here. It conflates those who are merely non-Jewish with those who may, perhaps even on a genetic level, harbor inclinations towards anti-Jewishness. Historically, the white non-Jew, particularly the intergenerational Christian, practicing secular or cultural, undoubtedly exemplifies this predisposition. And that's a problem we have to deal with. To truly appreciate Christianity's culpability in regard to latent and overt anti-Semitism in our era, one must first understand its Jewish roots. Christianity is built, just like the West itself, on a bedrock of Jewish traditions and teachings. Jesus, the central figure of Christianity, was himself a Jew, confusing Christian anti-Semites to no end, and his message, while initially aimed at a Jewish audience, expanded, much to the distaste of Jewish people, to include non-Jews as ethical equals under one God, antagonistically diluting the idea of Jewish exclusivity and chosenness. Early Christians, eager to carve out a distinct identity and offended by Jewish claims of their prophet's false messiahhood, often blamed Jews for Jesus' death, after Jews were forced by socio-cultural pressures and desperation to pursue his demise openly and gladly, lest they themselves surely perish. These tensions between Christians and Jews eventually morphed into widespread, unwarranted persecution and dislike. The Roman Empire, the actual murderers of Jesus, were reliably unhelpful here. After destroying the Second Temple in Jerusalem in 70 CE and quashing the Bar Kokhba revolt in 135 CE, where he, a more authentic candidate for Jewish messiahhood, sought bravely to free his people from Roman and Christian tyranny and reclaim the sacred land of his people, the Romans responded without pity and cracked down hard and mercilessly upon all Jewish kind. They imposed harsh restrictions, killing and enslaving many, and they expelled them from what was once their ancestral home, leading to a long period of displacement and wandering. During these tough times, the Jewish people faced enormous challenges. They were often barred from setting up permanent communities, pushed from one region to the next as their welcome was withdrawn, and in that, they were forced to navigate a world that was incredibly hostile towards them. Despite this, Jewish communities managed to cling to their cultural and religious identity, holding on to the hope of one day returning to their geographical birthright as all Jews now can. Under these circumstances and over time, Jews were pressured to adapt and evolve. Being unable in many cases to purchase land, be it to offer for lease or rent, as was their custom, they were often forced to speculate on the values of properties and currencies to survive. Hunted and persecuted by those who believed in the most dangerous of anti-Semitic tropes, Jews were also made to retreat from public view into cold tunnels and subterranean grottos, pushed away from the light of God's grace in order to practice and maintain their faith and culture authentically, made to clip and shave off the edges of coins to survive, able, in the minting of new coins, to pay for bread and butter they would otherwise have been denied. Even these hardships weren't enough to stoke the sympathies of Christians. Again and again, and certainly with the rise of the Catholic Church as the dominant force across Europe, Jews were expelled again and again and again and again. On top of everything else that Jews were made to put up with, many early Christians also believed that Jews were practitioners of dark magic. Not because they were, or because any evidence of this was ever found, but because Jews themselves as a survival necessity did whatever they could to keep themselves and their beliefs out of the way of those they knew were prone to such irrational or libelous trains of thought. All this did, unfortunately, was make the non-Jewish community even more anti-Semitic and unreasonable for no good reason. In much the same way, we can see how the modern Jew is often forced to hide his early life from public view, as he frequently did in the past, often pressured into changing his name to anglicize it, purely so that he could blend in with those who would oppress him otherwise, sometimes shedding his traditional attire and way of life completely, pretending or even tricking himself into thinking that he was one of those of whom he feared. Even more insultingly, he was asked at more than one point to humiliate himself and his ancestors, by being asked, in order to acquire passage to safety amid World War II, to draw a cross on his refugee and asylum papers, the cross itself being a trigger symbol, antagonizingly similar to a Christianic crucifix, only to then be laughed at or scorned when he drew a circle, or kaikel in Hebrew, as a fair and appropriate compromise, leading to the derogatory K-word. This led to further Judeo-phobic accusations of Christianophobic dislike of anything close to a T or cross shape, which, while true to a certain degree, was completely understandable and fair. We can see even more recently how Jews as a whole have been betrayed by the non-white community they've worked so hard to build and administer. Forced to deny atrocious claims of fellow whiteness or ultra-whiteness by those who seek to undermine and destroy Israel, by toxically conflating it, along with all Jewish kind geopolitically, with their morally lesser and unforgivably white colonial peers. Jews, by necessity, as we can see, have had to remain flexible, and in the face of significant adversity, as morally or principally fluid as is required, you might say. Not by choice, but in response to the aggressions and offenses of others. These are but a few of the ways that Jewish people to this day are insulted, persecuted, and cast under the proverbial bus of progress as a sacrifice to a new, unfair God.